Thank you for visiting the Africa Rising Cycling Podcast, where we share the big and most interesting cycling stories from across the continent of Africa and from around the world where African cyclists are racing and riding.
For this episode, we wanted to hear views on African cycling from some true experts. Folk who devour roadbooks, scour pro cycling stats for fascinating facts and statistics, alongside their deep understanding of the sport. These are, of course, the race commentators. In our planning of this podcast, we were actually thinking of not sharing the names at the beginning to see how long our listeners took to work out who they are just from their voices. But we decided this was a little bit too mean. We are hugely excited to be joined on the microphone today by three of the absolute best in the world: Anthony McCrossan, Hannah Walker, and Phil Liggett, MBE. Welcome to the Africa Rising Cycling Podcast, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, well said, Hannah.
Yeah, that was good. Looking forward to this.
Before we talk about the folk and the sport you guys love to talk about, let's talk about each of you and your journey into cycling and commentating. Hannah, starting with you.
I came into cycling pretty late. I was formerly a runner, athletics, cross-country runner. I cut a long story short, I was injured when I was 14. It turned out I had juvenile arthritis in my knee. I came to cycling via the Manchester Velodrome, actually. And my mum took me for a taster session there. Never looked back. I just absolutely loved it. Loved the thrill. Loved what cycling was. Yeah, I just loved it. Loved the racing. Loved the thrill. I stopped racing in 2017, but in 2016 I started to commentate. That was my first taste of commentary, and that was at the Doha World Championships. I was working alongside Carlton Kirby, and then just from there on in, worked with Anthony on so many events. I mean, we've spent hours and hours and hours we've spent so many brilliant journeys and car journeys together, but also hours in the commentary box together. And yeah, it's just a real privilege to do this job and to be able to speak about something that I'm so deeply passionate about and I love, and whether I'm working on a race or not, I'm still watching it.
I got into this because of Phil. And he doesn't do
My fault. So you're blaming me?
It's totally you, Phil. It's completely you. So in 1982, I was watching World of Sport with my dad on the sofa, and the World Road Race Championships came on television and Phil was the commentator. There's that famous moment where Jonathan Boyer attacks up the climb and Greg LeMond is in the next group behind, and ultimately Cerrone wins the Worlds for Italy and Sean Kelly gets the bronze medal for Ireland. And Phil's commentary was amazing. And that's the reason I got into bike racing, because my dad turned around to me and said, wow, like I was mad about football before that. And he said, God, you really loved that. And then years later, my big moment, and I don't know if Phil remembers this, I was in one commentary box with Hugh Porter doing the live crowd, and I'd never done it to that big an event. And in the commentary box next door was Phil and Paul. And I remember asking Phil, can you give me some advice? And he gave me two bits of advice. He said, just say what you see. And the second thing is, if you make a mistake, don't apologize. And I'll never forget it. So it's all down to him.
You're absolutely right, Anthony. And I told Paul Sherwin the same advice, because when you're commentating at full speed, you do make slips, let's be honest. And as I said to Paul, I didn't mean to say that. I said, Paul, never apologize.
No.
95% of that audience never heard that mistake. And so once you apologize, that 95% want to know what you said.
I've never said it, because we always just talk about the race we happen to be at, and it's normally the Tour. But without your commentary in 1982, I wouldn't have got into bike racing. Without that advice, I would probably not have carried on being a commentator. And I've been lucky enough to work with Hannah loads, and I'm still lucky enough to bump into Phil at the Tour and just listen to the voice.
I got into cycling. I was hopeless at every school sport, but I found I could ride a bike. And so that's how my life started. I started riding my bike at 15. From there, I just saw these posh racing cyclists. I thought, I've got to be one of them guys, professional cycle. Got to be one of them. They wear leather jackets and have fast cars. And then from cycling, well, I went to Belgium. I got the offer of a contract at the same time I was writing. So then I'm into television. And again, I followed my nose. I never tried on a few funny races around the world, like the Tour of Zambia, where I had, at the Tour of Zambia, I had 26 starters and 35 finished. The Zanzibar team came a bit late, and as they were on a government grant,
Brilliant.
I had to let them ride. 52 tours, 53 this year.
Wow.
And I did 17 Olympic Games, and I said no to Los Angeles in a couple of years. I thought I'm getting too old for this.
Let's talk about African cycling now. Let's talk about the guys that you guys talk about. I think we have to start right at the top with Biniam Girmay. Obviously, he's had a good start to 2026, which is great with a couple of wins. But man, back in 2022, he won Wevelgem in March, and then I think you were there in Hungary at the start of the Giro when he came second in the first stage in Visegrad. Can you recall that moment? And what did you think of this sort of young guy that maybe you'd not seen before?
Yeah, I was there in Hungary, and Hungary was a great experience because the crowd was massive. But I remember it was slightly uphill, and I think Biniam went just a little bit too early in the sprint because Mathieu van der Poel came from a little bit further back. And then there's that moment where I thought Biniam was going to win, but Caleb Ewan hit his back wheel, didn't he? Caleb hits his back wheel, crashes and spins around, and then Mathieu comes up and beats him, and Biniam gets second place. So I thought for a moment when I was calling at the finish that he was going to win. But from that moment, I thought he's going to win something huge.
I think it's incredible his rise and how quickly he was able to be in a position of challenging for a win. Because I remember meeting Biniam at the World Championships in Leuven in 2021, and we were actually staying at the same hotel. And been seeing him all week with him and his teammates, and then of course he took that incredible silver medal, and I saw him outside the hotel and we exchanged some short words, and he was just so humble about it and so unassuming that, well, yeah, I've got this silver medal and of course I'm really, really proud, but it was so humble, just down to earth.
Yeah.
And then you fast forward 8 months and he's at the Giro, and he's already won Gent-Wevelgem, which was a huge moment. And then you get to a Grand Tour and he's already challenging for stage wins. Because I think when you look at the way he races, he's so smart the way he's able to navigate through a bunch and in a messy sprint as well.
Yes.
He has so much power and such speed. It's incredible.
Growing up in those Sunday races in Asmara, it's pretty good practice for that. Obviously, I mean, at that Giro, I mean, he went on to get top 5 in 4 other stages. He won a stage there on the 17th of May and then a stage at Tour de Suisse in 2023. But then obviously his big moment with 3 stage wins and the green jersey at Tour de France 2024. I mean, Hannah, you were there. How can you describe seeing a black African and even just a black man winning stages of being on the top step at the end of the race?
It was huge. It was huge. And that is a moment that I will never forget, especially that first stage victory, because the buzz at the finish line, and there was so many Eritrean fans with Eritrean flags at the finish as well, as they are always now, I've got to say. I remember running from the finish line and we're waiting for the team car to arrive, and Ike Visbeek arrives, and we immediately got this interview with Ike and what it meant to the team, to him. But it was just very, very special. But also, I've got to say and mention, Jeremy, that the day when he won in the Giro in Jesi, I remember being there for that as well, and that was just something else. And that moment, it still gives me goosebumps, actually, when Mathieu van der Poel almost, he just points to Biniam Girmay like, wow.
Yeah.
Just take a bow. That was something else.
I can only imagine the scenes. They used to show pictures every night of the Eritreans watching television in the homes or in the village hall, cheering the live pictures that we're seeing as well and pushing him on, the atmosphere was electric, and those guys must have been knackered by the end of the tour. They only won 3 stages because they stayed up through the night, every night, for the transmission times. But this guy overnight became a hero because he was doing something that set him apart from the rest of his country, where they all wanted to be in the same place. And as a result of that, it's done so much good for the country.
It's funny you talk about the Eritrean fans watching. In many cases, like in Eritrea, they're in cinemas and cafes.
Yes.
The cinemas show Tour de France live, and there's a story I was told by one of the national federation that Biniam was in one of these cinemas in 2015 when Tekla Heimanot won, and he was deciding a black ant. He was deciding football or cycling, and saw Daniel Tekla Heimanot win, and went, "Yeah, I'll have a crack at cycling." So that was his decision point.
Quickly, one thing I always say is people need an opportunity, and you can have all of the talent in the world in whatever it is, but unless you're given an opportunity to be able to use that talent, the talent could go to waste. There's probably so many people on this planet who could be top class pros, riders, sports people, but unless you're given an opportunity. And so it's when talent meets opportunity that great things can happen.
One of our big projects this year, we're doing a project with Zwift, and we have around 300 of their smart hubs, which we're shipping out all over Africa. And the idea is to get the sort of 15, 16, 17-year-olds on, so they can start learning cadence and power and all the basics of cycling, which if you haven't got a bike, you're just never going to get your head around. We've talked about Biniam in a lot, and obviously he's been there for 2 or 3 years, but in 2025, another African kind of went one better. In 2013, you'll all know that South African Daryl Impey set the record for the first African to ever wear a Tour de France yellow jersey, wearing it for 2 days. But last summer, the amazing Kim Lecourt of Mauritius took it and held it for 3 days for her team AG Insurance Soudal.
She'd been knocking on the door forever, hasn't she? And Hannah, the whole opportunity thing that Hannah talks about is so linked to Kim Lecourt, because she tried for so long to be a professional bike rider. And there's that story about her and her partner writing to all the teams, just saying, just give me a chance. But last year, her season was exceptional, wasn't it? I remember seeing her in the UAE tour at the beginning of the year. She missed the crosswinds one day and ended up 3rd overall. Then she came back to Europe. She's clearly incredibly strong. That win in Liège, if you watch it, how clever she was to win that race, because we're not talking about, she was in a breakaway all day and then the riders came up to her and then she ends up winning from a little group sprint because Vollering and Kopecky and everyone have caught her. We're talking about a situation where Vollering, Pizza, Cabal, Kopecky are up the road, and then she goes across when the world champion cracks and then beats them all in the sprint. That is clever bike racing. That shows how talented you are, but how clever tactically you are as well. And then for her to go to the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift and do what she did, to the point where actually we're thinking, can she win this race? It was a dream scenario, and she was super strong. So I think 2025 brings you Kim Lecourt, starts as a rider that you kind of know, surprises everybody in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, comes of age in the Tour de France Femme, World Championship, she's there as a possible winner of the Worlds, and probably will be on the podium of the Worlds, if not win it in the coming years.
She got won that big race, the Cape Town Cycle Tour, 3 times straight. I think 20, 21, 22, or 21, 22, 23. 3 times straight. And I thought, why does this girl keep messing around? Because it's a hard race. She beats big bike riders. But she should be in Europe. And it was some years later, in fact, just 2 years ago, I thought, she changed her name slightly. She obviously got married, Pinier. And I thought, blimey, she's got some guidance now, because I knew her talent was there. There was no question about it. Now it's coming through. And she's a fabulous bike rider, and good luck to her. But I've never actually spoken to her.
I remember when she was racing for the UCI team and then stepped away from European racing and then came back, and it was that determination of, I've got something and I need to show what I can do. I know I can be one of the top bike riders in the world. 2024, it was very much a lot of learning for Kim LaCour, trying to find a way and also prove to the team the reason why they should have taken a chance. And I have to say, you have to give a big credits to Natasha Carnarvon, because she took the big chance on Kim LaCour in making sure that AG Insurance Sudal recruited Kim LaCour. Her drive to succeed is actually like nothing I've ever seen in a rider.
One of the best scenes in cycling in the last 24 months was stage 5 at the Tour de France. I think she got 16 bonus seconds and put her in yellow by 2 seconds. And she didn't believe it. And you had this amazing live TV footage of her going, no.
Anthony and I were on the finish line of that stage into Greuret, and we have been covering the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift since its inception in 2022. It was just... Do you remember when she was coming down the descent, Anthony, into that final, and it was a few Ks to go, and you just watched the way that she was positioning herself, holding herself on the bike, the way she was looking around. You knew there were other riders like Demi Vollering who desperately wanted to win the stage. Almost, and dare I say it, too much. She wanted it too much. And so she was leading it out. And Kim was just sitting comfortably. She was gliding. She was floating around. It was a combination and coming together of everything. Anthony knows there's very few moments that really make me emotional or give us both goosebumps in a commentary box. But that was one of those moments where you think, this sporting moment right now is something that is going to be remembered. You're going to remember where you are when it happened.
You can take yourself back there, can't you? Because it's you're very aware afterwards, and maybe in the moment. I'm not sure if you know it in the moment because you're in it, aren't you? But you are so aware that this transcends sports, becomes a sporting story worldwide.
There will be 20 African women racing in 2026 on UCI teams like Canyon Shrams, on Crypto, DAS Hutchinson, Smurfit. There's 9 women on the new Team Amani from East Africa. There's 5 African women on the UCI's World Cycling Centre team. Probably the standout rider of that group is 18-year-old Siga Kase Kiros from Ethiopia. She's the rider, if you're not familiar, that just basically lit up that World's Junior race at the World Championships in Kigali. Hannah, Siga's just got a 3-year deal with Canyon Shrams under Crypto. He's now represented by Alex Carrera. He represents Pogacar, Binyam Gamay, Henok Mulubram. Can you remember seeing her at the Worlds, and what was your impression?
Yeah, I can. I was commentating the Junior World Road Race Championships that day, and you saw the way she raced. You know, there was times where you're like, oh, just hold yourself back a little bit. But she had the power and she's got the talent. And then ultimately finishing with a 7th place in that road race that day. And you saw the reaction afterwards. But dare I say, it actually came before that in the Mur de Bretagne stage of the Tour de France, where she was at the finish line. And Tadej Pogacar gave her his flowers from the podium. Just looking at her as an athlete, that is another rider who, with that opportunity, with that chance, and with the door being open to step through, and with a little bit of coaching, maybe just a little bit tactically, because the power's there and the engine's there, and she showed that in Rwanda last year. What a great job that Canyon Shrams under Crypto are doing with their generation team, being able to have that World Tour squad and then have the resources to have a development squad. And they've had it for a number of years now, where they're able to nurture the talent and not force them and push them too quickly before they're ready. So give them an opportunity to learn and to thrive in an environment, learn from smaller races, have the chance to develop. And I'm really excited. And having a 3-year contract is also something which takes the stress, the pressure away of thinking, I need to perform this year because otherwise I'm not going to get a contract. Now she's got 3 years to find her own pathway, to learn from mistakes, but also to try and soak up all of the information, the knowledge from everybody, and find who she is, what kind of rider she is.
We should give a shout out to Canyon Shrams on the Cryptos, and Hannah mentioned they've been a big supporter of African riders here for many years now. But the other team that on the men's side there has been is Bikeaid, headquartered in Germany, but have been supporting African riders for well over a decade. And they've taken on 19-year-old Eritrean Nahom Ephraim. And if you recall that men's junior race, he was the guy that also lit up that men's junior race as well. We have around about 115 Africans now in UCI World Tour Pro Conti and Conti teams for 2026. I mean, Phil, it's been over 15 years since we saw Doug Ryder's MTN Quebec team turn up with Adrian Neon-Schutti, as no one had ever seen before. Now we have dozens of riders from Africa. Do you think Africa has now earned its place in the peloton?
Yeah, it started, you're right, by Dougie Ryder, very underestimated guy. I've known Dougie for years. I think he's gone totally unnoticed in what he's done. He's got on with the job and done it himself. Like everybody, he gets criticised and for the wrong reasons, but he achieved with Quebec. It's like when the Brits started 30 years ago. Instead, the Belgians and the French didn't think much of Britain. I was standing by myself on my first Tour de France, and nobody spoke to me because I didn't speak French then. They just said bonjour. Second year, they say bonjour, comment tu vas? And the third year, they ask how you're really getting on, and then you suddenly been accepted by them because you like their sport. So our guys have succeeded hard, but they've done it, and the Africans are on the cusp now of becoming everyday recognition. We're not surprised anymore when we start commentating on a black African in the lead. We all want to see him achieve and tell the story and be part of us. And we want to be part of them, let's face it too. So, yeah, I think this year will be a big breakthrough year.
Just to touch on what Phil said about Doug Ryder, I do agree that what he's done in the background with his teams and for African cycling does go criticised and unnoticed. Because I remember back to 2013 to Milano San Remo, and it's not an African rider winning, but that's a massive moment. I can remember standing in San Remo, commentating on the finish, and then Gerald Cholek winning for MTN Quebec. And I wasn't doing the presentation of the podium. Paolo was doing it with Stefano, but I was in the middle with Doug Ryder and his team around, and they were in total disbelief because he'd just beaten Sagan and Cancellara on a day when they had to stop the race for 2 hours because of snow, because we couldn't get over Torquino. That was a massive moment. And then I remember when Daniel Teckel-Eminot won the King of the Mountains jersey in the Dauphiné, Doug couldn't control himself. Like, he was in the commentary box with me. He's like, I need to watch. So he was in the comment. You know what he's like, Phil. He's got so much energy. Hannah, you know him well. And he's just buzzing. He sat down, stand up, sit down, stand up. And he's there. And that's an historic moment. An African team with an Eritrean rider win a jersey in a Tour de France build-up race. But still, Doug Ryder doesn't get mentioned that much. And he's still there, and he's still doing it, and he's still progressing, and it's incredible.
I was going to ask each of you to wrap up with your sort of favorite African cycling moment.
I think I could list a load of them.
Yeah, I think you could.
Yeah. Well, go on. So we start number one. No, my favorite African cycling moment, without a doubt, is Biniam Girmay winning that stage into Turin. Because for me, it's the moment in sport. It's not a moment in cycling. It completely changes the outlook of African cycling. It hits sporting touch points all over the place. I can still picture it. I think you can hear in my voice, I'm pretty shocked that he's won, actually, because it's just the way he comes down the barriers. Pedersen goes on the middle. He comes down the barriers. He finds his way out and he hits the line and wins. And you're just like, Biniam Girmay's won. Like, this is incredible. And at the same time, Nico Roach is like next to me, and he's off his chair. He's jumping up and down. I think Nico goes, what a finish. Like, what an incredible sprint. And he can't contain himself. So for me, There's so many others, but Biniam winning that stage just impacts world sport, not cycling. It impacts a country, it inspires a generation, it changes everything. That's why.
I'm going to have to agree. It really is one of my biggest moments. Not just the one stage, but that whole tour in 2024. To be able to win stage 3 and then back it up and win his second stage, and then to take a third stage win and then take the green jersey. Those 3 weeks showed the world what was possible. I'm curious in years to come what his mark will be on cycling and how many will have pursued a career or pursued to get to a top level or to be a pro because of Biniam Girmay, and because they, whether it be in, like we spoke about before, in Eritrea, whether it be in the cinemas or the bars or whatever, and they saw him win those stages and they wanted to be the next Biniam Girmay, and they wanted to be just like him. So for me, it's incredible. But I do have to say, I want a second one, please, Jeremy, because Kim LaCour thinks she's just a definition of a tenacious rider who doesn't give up and doesn't take no for an answer. And she's tried to become a pro at 19. Very, very difficult. Went back. She still kept racing mountain bikes, Cape Epic, all the rest of it. And she is believed in herself. She's backed herself. And I think that is something, not just in sport, but I think everybody should take with them, the way she fights what she believes in. She knew she could be a top level bike rider, and she's proved exactly why everyone should have taken that chance on her.
Phil, we have to ask you your favourite African cycling moment.
There's been a few. There's been a few. Let's not forget Chris Froome, Tour de France winner.
Yes.
I remember when he was a pro for Konica Minolta, but he lived his life out in South Africa till he left. And he got no support from his federations. That's why he never got selected, and that's why he became a Brit again, because he wasn't getting sent to any of the games. And he's done wonders, but he's still, in his heart, African. He speaks Swahili when he used to meet Paul Sherwin. He once said 8 years ago, maybe 10, well into his career as a superstar, his one ambition, and we might realise it soon, is to go back home and help others achieve what he's done. And if he does, and I hope he does, that will be big. Then the other one is, of course, is Daryl Impey, totally not revered for his great yellow jersey in the Tour de France for those couple of days. So, look, I love what Gremium does, and I remember calling the third of his 3 stage wins, and I was looking at Paul Sherwin's face, and he was crying. It meant so much. It was not a good time to ask Paul for a comment, I know that. No, I think to sum it up, Jeremy, Africa is not just rising, it's risen.
Well, look, thank you guys for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear from the voices of cycling talking about African cycling. And we expect and hope a lot more in 2026. As we mentioned earlier, there'll be over 115 Africans racing in these races all across Europe and the world, and you guys will be there commentating. So hopefully you'll have a lot to talk about. So thanks for your time today, everybody. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Africa Rising Cycling Podcast. If you like what you have heard, please do share our podcast with your friends and on social media. Leave us a review or even make a donation to Africa Rising Cycling. All of this will help us to continue to bring you fascinating stories about African cycling.